The winter wind rattled the windows of Heritage Antiques in Salem, Massachusetts, as appraiser Robert Matthews carefully sorted through the estate collection of the recently deceased Mrs. Florence Whitmore. At 89, she had left behind a house filled with generations of family memorabilia, including dozens of vintage photographs spanning nearly a century. Most of these are standard Victorian family portraits, Robert murmured to himself, examining sepia-toned images under his desk lamp. The familiar musty scent of old paper and time-worn memories filled his small office as he worked through the evening hours. Then he found it, a formal family photograph from 1899, mounted in an elaborate silver frame with ornate corner decorations. The image showed a well-dressed family of 5, a distinguished father with a carefully waxed mustache, a mother in an elegant dark dress with intricate beadwork, and 3 children of varying ages, 2 boys and a young girl, arranged in the formal poses typical of late 19th century photography. The family stood in what appeared to be their parlor, with rich wallpaper and expensive furniture visible in the background. The father's hand rested on the shoulder of the eldest son, while the mother stood beside their daughter, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The youngest boy, perhaps 5, stood between his parents with the serious expression common to children of that photographic era. At first glance, it seemed like countless other Victorian family portraits, prosperous, formal, and unremarkable. The kind of photograph that would have been displayed with pride in any well-to-do American household at the turn of the century. But as Robert adjusted his magnifying glass to examine the image more closely, something in the background caught his attention. There, partially obscured by the elaborate curtains behind the family, was what appeared to be the edge of a hand, fingers barely visible at the very edge of the frame. Robert blinked and looked again. The hand seemed out of place, as if someone else had been standing just outside the photograph's composition, hidden behind the heavy drapes that framed the parlor window. He shook his head, attributing the observation to tired eyes and the dim lighting in his office. 3 days later, Robert couldn't shake his curiosity about the mysterious hand in the photograph. Using his high-resolution scanner and digital enhancement software, he examined the image with a thoroughness that had made him one of New England's most respected antique appraisers. Under magnification, the details became much clearer and much more disturbing. The hand was definitely there, partially concealed behind the ornate curtains that hung beside the parlor window. But it wasn't just any hand. It was clearly that of an adult, with long, slender fingers that seemed to be gripping the fabric of the curtain, as if the person was deliberately hiding while the photograph was being taken. Even more unsettling, the positioning suggested that whoever was behind the curtain was quite tall, as the hand appeared at a height that would correspond to someone standing rather than sitting or crouching. Robert examined the family members more closely. All 5 faces showed the serious expressions typical of the era's long photographic exposure times. But there was something else, a tension, in their postures that seemed to go beyond the normal stiffness of Victorian portrait photography. The father's grip on his eldest son's shoulder appeared tighter than necessary, his knuckles showing white even in the sepia tones. The mother's hands were clasped so tightly that Robert could make out the strain in her fingers. Most telling of all, the children's eyes seemed to be looking not at the camera, but slightly to the right, in the direction of the hidden curtain. The youngest boy's expression, in particular, showed what looked like barely contained fear, his small mouth set in a tight line that suggested he was struggling not to cry. Robert printed several enhanced versions of the photograph and studied them under different lighting conditions. There was no doubt about it. Someone else had been in that room when the photograph was taken, someone who had deliberately remained hidden from view. But who and why? Dr. Sarah Whitfield at Salem Historical Society was Robert's go-to expert for local genealogy and Victorian-era records. When he brought her the enhanced photographs, her scholarly demeanor immediately shifted to one of intense professional interest. "This is extraordinary," she said, adjusting her reading glasses as she examined the images. "The photographic quality is exceptional for 1899, which suggests this was taken by a professional photographer, rather than an amateur enthusiast." Robert pointed out the hidden hand and the family's tense expressions. Dr. Whitfield studied these details with growing fascination. "The family's clothing indicates significant wealth," she observed. "The father's suit is clearly custom-tailored, and the mother's dress shows expensive craftsmanship. The children's outfits are equally fine. This was definitely a family of considerable social standing." Using the Salem Historical Society's extensive archives, they began searching for records that might identify the family. The photograph's professional quality provided their first clue. Salem had only 3 photography studios operating in 1899, and each kept detailed client records. "Here we are," Dr. Whitfield said, consulting a leather-bound appointment book from Morrison Photography Studio. October 12th, 1899, the Aldrich family. Jonathan Aldrich, prominent businessman. The appointment notes are quite detailed. She read from the studio records. "A family portrait commissioned by Mr. Aldrich for important business documentation. Specific request for formal parlor setting in family residence rather than studio. Payment in advance, substantial fee. Photographer's notes indicate unusual circumstances and additional considerations, but no further details provided. What kind of business was Jonathan Aldrich in? Robert asked. Dr. Whitfield reached for another archive box. Let's find out. And more importantly, let's discover why someone else was hiding in that room when this photograph was taken. The mystery was about to deepen considerably. Jonathan Aldrich's name appeared prominently throughout Salem's business records from 1895 to 1900. He owned Aldrich Shipping and Trade Company, which specialized in importing goods from Asia and the Caribbean. The business had grown rapidly, making Aldrich one of Salem's wealthiest and most influential residents. His shipping company had exclusive contracts with several overseas suppliers, Dr. Whitfield explained, spreading business documents across the research table. Tea, spices, textiles, and luxury goods. He built quite an empire in just a few years. Robert studied the import records and noticed something unusual. These manifests show shipments arriving at odd intervals, sometimes 3 ships in 1 week, then nothing for months. That seems like an irregular pattern for a legitimate trading business. Dr. Whitfield nodded thoughtfully. You're right. Most successful importers maintained steady, predictable schedules to serve their retail customers. This pattern suggests something else entirely. They discovered that Aldrich had developed relationships with wealthy collectors and private buyers throughout New England, people who were interested in acquiring rare and unusual items that weren't available through conventional merchants. But here's what's interesting, Dr. Whitfield continued, pointing to newspaper business reports. In late 1899, just around the time this photograph was taken, federal customs officials began investigating several New England import companies for irregularities in cargo documentation. Margaret found this detail intriguing. Was Aldrich's company under investigation? That's exactly what I'm wondering, Dr. Whitfield replied. And look at this. Within weeks of the customs investigation beginning, Aldrich liquidated several of his most valuable shipments at significantly reduced prices. Something had made him very eager to convert inventory to cash. Quickly, the business records suggested that whatever had attracted federal attention in late 1899 had seriously disrupted Aldrich's import operations. The formal family portrait began to make more sense in this context. Maybe he needed the photograph to reassure business partners or investors that his family was stable and respectable despite the federal scrutiny, Robert suggested. But that still doesn't explain who was hiding behind the curtain. Dr. Whitfield noted ominously. Dr. Whitfield's research into the 1898 customs investigation revealed a complex federal operation targeting what authorities suspected was a sophisticated smuggling network operating along the New England coast. The Treasury Department had been tracking unusual shipping patterns for over a year, Dr. Whitfield explained, consulting federal records that had been declassified decades later. They suspected that several import companies were bringing in contraband hidden among legitimate cargo. The investigation, led by Treasury agent Marcus Flynn, had focused on companies that showed irregular shipping schedules and unusually high profits compared to their documented imports. Aldrich Shipping and Trade Company had been at the top of their list. Agent Flynn's reports describe Aldrich as evasive and uncooperative during initial questioning, Dr. Whitfield read from the federal files. Flynn noted that Aldrich seemed unusually nervous and requested multiple postponements of interviews. Robert began to understand the significance of the timing. So this family photograph was taken right in the middle of a federal investigation? It appears so, but there's more. Dr. Whitfield pulled out another document. Agent Flynn's personal notes describe surveillance operations on the Aldrich residence during October 1899. He suspected that evidence was being hidden or destroyed, and he had obtained authorization for covert observation. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The hidden hand in the photograph, the family's tense expressions, the formal documentation, it all pointed to a family under intense scrutiny from federal authorities. Agent Flynn was known for his unconventional investigative methods, Dr. Whitfield continued. His reports mention using innovative surveillance techniques and close observation protocols that allowed him to gather evidence without alerting suspects. Robert felt a chill of realization. You think the hand in the photograph belongs to Agent Flynn? I think Agent Flynn found a way to be present during the family portrait session, possibly to observe or document something that he couldn't obtain through conventional means. The photograph was beginning to reveal itself as evidence of a much larger and more dangerous game of cat and mouse between a suspected smuggler and a determined federal agent. Further research into Agent Flynn's methods revealed that he had developed innovative techniques for gathering evidence against suspected smugglers. Treasury Department records showed that Flynn often used social events and family gatherings as opportunities to observe suspects in their private environments. Flynn believed that people revealed their true nature when they thought they were safe in their own homes, Dr. Whitfield explained, reading from the agent's training manuals. He developed methods for infiltrating social situations without being detected. The photographer's notes from the Morrison studio provided crucial additional information. Robert and Dr. Whitfield discovered that the studio had been contacted not just by Jonathan Aldrich, but also by a representative of a government agency who had requested specific arrangements for the portrait session. The photographer was asked to position the family in a specific location within their parlor. Dr. Whitfield read from the studio's detailed notes. He was also instructed to use a longer exposure time than usual and to ensure that certain areas of the room remained in shadow. These instructions made perfect sense if someone needed to remain hidden during the photograph while still being able to observe and document the family's behavior. Agent Flynn's reports describe Jonathan Aldrich as someone who maintains elaborate deceptions even within his own household. Dr. Whitfield continued. Flynn suspected that Aldrich's family might not be fully aware of the illegal nature of his business activities. The tension visible in the family's faces now took on new meaning. They weren't just posing for a formal portrait. They were unknowingly participating in a federal surveillance operation. "Look at this," Robert said, pointing to another detail he'd noticed in the enhanced photographs. The positioning of the furniture seems deliberately arranged to create clear sight lines to different parts of the room. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was documentation. Agent Flynn was gathering evidence, Dr. Whitfield agreed. But evidence of what exactly? The answer came from shipping manifests and customs records that Dr. Whitfield uncovered in the Federal Archives. Agent Flynn's investigation had revealed that Aldrich Shipping and Trade Company was involved in smuggling far more than just luxury goods. They were bringing in stolen artifacts from archaeological sites in Central America and Asia. The illegal antiquities trade was enormous in the 1890s, Dr. Whitfield explained. Wealthy American collectors were paying premium prices for artifacts that were being stolen from archaeological sites around the world. Agent Flynn's reports described a sophisticated operation where legitimate imports were used to conceal priceless stolen artifacts. Ancient pottery, jade sculptures, gold ornaments, and ceremonial objects were being smuggled into the United States and sold to private collectors who didn't ask questions about their origins. Aldrich had developed relationships with unscrupulous dealers in Guatemala, China, and Egypt, Dr. Whitfield read from Flynn's investigation notes. These dealers were systematically looting archaeological sites and shipping the artifacts to Aldrich, who then sold them to American museums and private collectors. The family portrait began to make even more sense in this context. Aldrich needed to project an image of respectability and cultural sophistication to maintain his relationships with museum curators and wealthy collectors. But Agent Flynn suspected that the family's parlor contained evidence of the smuggling operation. Dr. Whitfield continued. His notes describe valuable artifacts displayed as household decorations and evidence of illicit cultural appropriation throughout the residence. Robert examined the background of the photograph more carefully. Behind the family, partially visible on shelves and tables, were objects that looked like they might be ancient artifacts, pottery, small sculptures, and decorative items that seemed out of place in a typical Victorian American parlor. Flynn was documenting the stolen artifacts in their natural setting, Robert realized. The family portrait was actually evidence of cultural theft on a massive scale. Agent Flynn's investigation reached its climax in November 1899, just weeks after the family portrait was taken. Treasury Department records revealed that Flynn had gathered enough evidence to obtain search warrants for both Aldrich's business premises and his residence. The raid on the Aldrich mansion uncovered one of the largest collections of stolen artifacts ever discovered in New England. Dr. Whitfield read from newspaper accounts of the operation. Authorities found over 200 pieces of ancient art and ceremonial objects from archaeological sites across 3 continents. The Boston Globe's coverage of the raid described rooms filled with priceless artifacts that had been stolen from Maya temples in Guatemala, ancient burial sites in China, and Egyptian tombs. Aldrich had been operating his smuggling network for over 5 years, accumulating what authorities estimated was millions of dollars worth of stolen cultural treasures. Jonathan Aldrich was arrested and charged with smuggling, conspiracy, and trafficking in stolen cultural property, Dr. Whitfield continued. But here's the interesting part. His family claimed to have no knowledge of the illegal nature of his business activities. The family's tense expressions in the photograph now made perfect sense. They had been living surrounded by stolen artifacts, probably told they were legitimate purchases or family heirlooms, unaware that their comfortable lifestyle was built on cultural theft. Agent Flynn's final report noted that Catherine Aldrich and the children seemed genuinely shocked when they learned the truth about the artifacts in their home, Dr. Whitfield explained. Flynn believed that Jonathan had deliberately kept his family ignorant of his illegal activities to protect them from prosecution. The hidden hand in the photograph belonged to an agent who was documenting not just a family portrait, but evidence of one of the 19th century's most sophisticated cultural theft operations. But the story wasn't over. Yet, the aftermath of Jonathan Aldrich's arrest had devastating consequences for his family. Court records revealed that Catherine Aldrich and her 3 children found themselves not only financially ruined, but also socially ostracized by Salem's elite society. The federal government seized all of the family's assets as proceeds from criminal activity. Dr. Whitfield discovered in the court documents the mansion, the furnishings, even Catherine's jewelry. Everything was considered evidence of the smuggling operation. The children's lives were particularly disrupted. The eldest son, Edward, who had been preparing to attend Harvard University, was forced to leave school and find work to support the family. The daughter, Margaret, faced social isolation as former friends' families forbade their children from associating with the daughter of a convicted smuggler. But the most remarkable part of the story, Dr. Whitfield continued, is what Catherine Aldrich did next. Court records show that Catherine had cooperated fully with Agent Flynn's investigation, providing detailed information about her husband's business activities and helping authorities trace the origins of the stolen artifacts. Her cooperation had been instrumental in ensuring that many of the cultural treasures could be returned to their countries of origin. Catherine established correspondence with museums and cultural institutions in Guatemala, China, and Egypt. Dr. Whitfield read from letters preserved in the federal archives. She worked tirelessly to ensure that the stolen artifacts were properly cataloged and returned to their rightful locations. This work had taken Catherine and her children in an unexpected direction. Rather than fleeing Salem in shame, they had transformed their family's disgrace into a mission of cultural restitution and historical preservation. By 1902, Catherine Aldrich had become one of New England's leading advocates for protecting archaeological sites and preventing cultural theft, Dr. Whitfield explained. She worked with federal authorities to educate collectors about the importance of verifying the legal provenance of artifacts. The family portrait that had started as evidence of criminal activity had inadvertently documented the beginning of a remarkable transformation. 15 years after discovering the photograph in Mrs. Whitmore's estate, Robert stood in the Salem Museum of Cultural Heritage next to a new exhibit titled Hidden in Plain Sight, the Aldrich Collection, and the Fight Against Cultural Theft. The 1899 family portrait now served as the centerpiece of a display about the importance of protecting archaeological treasures. The exhibit told the complete story of how Agent Flynn's investigation had not only exposed a major smuggling operation, but had also inspired a family's transformation from unwitting beneficiaries of cultural theft to passionate advocates for archaeological preservation. The Aldrich case was one of the first major federal prosecutions of cultural smuggling in American history. Dr. Whitfield explained to a group of museum visitors it established important legal precedents for protecting archaeological sites and returning stolen artifacts to their countries of origin. Robert had successfully traced the Aldrich family's later history through genealogical records. Edward Aldrich had become a museum curator, specializing in the ethical acquisition of artifacts. Margaret Aldrich had founded one of the first organizations dedicated to educating collectors about cultural theft. The youngest son, Thomas, had become an archaeologist who spent his career documenting and protecting historical sites. Their mother's work with Agent Flynn became the foundation for modern laws protecting cultural heritage, Dr. Whitfield noted. Catherine Aldrich's advocacy helped establish the international agreements that now govern the trade in archaeological artifacts. The mysterious hand in the photograph, Agent Flynn's hand, was now understood as a symbol of justice and cultural protection. Flynn's innovative surveillance techniques had not only exposed criminal activity, but had also sparked a movement to preserve humanity's shared cultural heritage. The photograph itself had been donated to the museum by Catherine Aldrich's great-granddaughter, who had traveled from Boston to see the exhibit and learn about her family's remarkable journey from disgrace to redemption. The hand that seemed so mysterious and threatening in 1899 was actually the hand of justice, Robert reflected as visitors studied the enhanced image. Agent Flynn's presence in that photograph represented the beginning of modern efforts to protect cultural treasures from theft and exploitation. The exhibit had become popular with law enforcement agencies, museum professionals, and cultural heritage advocates who saw the Aldrich story as a powerful reminder that families can overcome even the most devastating scandals by choosing to serve something greater than themselves. In the museum's guest book, visitors often wrote about their own discoveries of family secrets and how the Aldrich story had inspired them to transform difficult histories into positive legacies. The mysterious family portrait had become a testament to the power of redemption and the importance of protecting humanity's shared cultural inheritance.